This is a very important video, and I guarantee that you will find it to be an extremely interesting video. There are so many prophetic signs in the Manhattan blackout that occurred on July 13th, 2019, and the connections to these prophetic signs that are extremely important and profound. And this will sound very strange, but the Manhattan blackout was a major prophetic sign that is predicting that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan in New York City on February 3rd, 2024. And there will be a massive evacuation of Manhattan Island. It is also likely that the official narrative in the mainstream media that will emerge regarding this event will somehow be a lie. The date that this video is posted proves that this prediction was made ahead of time, as does this timestamped email and forensic notes PDF. If you are skeptical, please email me and I will forward these to you. Although it has been known since early 2021 that a dirty bomb would explode in Manhattan in the near future, as you can see in this email, this prediction for a dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan on February 3rd was known since at least December 17th. There are also many other videos on this channel that make this prediction that were posted many days before this video was posted. Welcome. This video regarding the prophetic signs that occurred on July 13th, 2019 in the Manhattan blackout and the related prophetic signs on that day was made. This video has been in the making since at least early 2022 and I think possibly into 2021. Regarding that, on that note, that the Lord has been revealing that there will be these dirty bombs or suitcase nuke explosion and evacuation from Manhattan Island since 2019, since the Manhattan blackout. This was the first heads up, if you will, for this recognition. And I will be explaining much around the Manhattan blackout in this video. But what I want to do is give a short explanation at the beginning of this video regarding how the Manhattan blackout, in fact, actually connects directly to the predicted date of March 22nd, 2025 for the predicted dirty bombs in Manhattan and evacuation from Manhattan Island. That direct connection is from July 13th, 2019, exactly 9 times 11 plus 9 times 11 plus 9 times 11 weeks to March 22nd, 2025. Now, God, for emphasis of its symbolic meaning, repeats a matter or a number 3 times. This is a pattern that he does in his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. And he also does this in Bible prophecy as well. And the significance of 9 times 11 plus 9 times 11 plus 9 times 11 weeks exactly couldn't be more profound. Because the coming prediction for the dirty bombs in Manhattan will be the follow-up to the warning of judgment that occurred on 9/11 in 2001 in Manhattan. Furthermore, the Manhattan blackout in July of 2019 contained 9/11 symbolism. For starters, for one example, the Manhattan blackout occurred during Manhattan Henge, which was this twice annual event in which the sun sets perfectly in between the canyon walls of the skyscrapers in Manhattan. And the Manhattan Henge was ideally observed from 42nd Avenue, and the initial report of customers without power was 42,000. It was later revised to 72,000, and the Manhattan blackout was largely between 42nd Avenue and 72nd Avenue in the area nicknamed Hell's Kitchen. which was also ironic given that part of the story was how the residents in Hell's Kitchen were out on the streets late into the night because their air conditioning was out. It was during a heat wave. And so it was sweltering. They were suffering, as in Hell's Kitchen. So, and one of the other stories, one of the main stories of this Manhattan blackout was the impromptu street performances of these two Broadway shows. One of them was Hadestown, which connected or was a parallel with the Manhattan blackout in Hell's Kitchen. Broadway was half lit and half dark, and that hinted at broad is the way to destruction and narrow is the way to life, as Jesus said. That's why Broadway was half lit and half dark. The half that was dark continued on into the Hell's Kitchen area of Manhattan. The other impromptu performance that was covered in the news was the Broadway musical Come From Away, which is a Broadway musical based on the true story that occurred on 9/11. On 9/11, many planes coming in from Europe were stranded in a small remote town in northern Newfoundland named Gander. And it's quite a story, and how the small town was overwhelmed, and the town folk took people into their homes that were stranded on these planes at the airport. And so anyway, there was a musical made about this human interest story, this heartwarming story, okay? And so that's a 9/11 sign, because that was part of the prophetic sign in the Manhattan blackout. Also, the sun setting is a sign in the night, is a sign in the sky, and Genesis 1:14 tells us that the lights in the sky are for prophetic signs. The Manhattan Henge setting, sunset. And the Manhattan blackout occurred during the sunset, which was quite something, because in this particular Manhattan Henge event, in which the sun sets perfectly between the canyon walls of the skyscrapers were black. There was a blackout. So it was an extraordinarily stunning Manhattan Henge. Well, also during this Manhattan Henge and the Manhattan blackout was the rare 4.0 magnitude earthquake in Manhattan, Montana. And that earthquake in Manhattan, Montana pointed to how it's situated above the lava plume deep beneath Manhattan, Montana of Yellowstone, which is in the 44th state, hence the 4.0 magnitude earthquake. And the caldera, which is what it's pointing to, the coming eruption of Yellowstone this August, the caldera sits at the 44 latitudinal line. And incidentally, the 110th longitudinal line. And 110 is a number that God uses for 9/11 symbolism, as it was 110 stories that collapsed when the towers were struck on 9/11. Anyway, this 4.0 magnitude earthquake that was prophetic because it was in Manhattan, Montana during the time of the Manhattan blackout occurred exactly 9 months and 11 days after the rare swarm of earthquakes began there. So the swarm of earthquakes began exactly 9 months and 11 days before the climax of this swarm, which was the 4.0 magnitude earthquake in Manhattan, Montana on the day of the Manhattan blackout. During the Manhattan blackout, not only just on the day, but during the blackout. Also, the blackout occurred exactly 110 minutes shy of an exact 42 years, 42nd anniversary, I should say, of the infamous New York City blackout, in which 9 million people were without power. That's a pairing of 9 and 110 that God does to confirm the signs and connections. And this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required. This is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which he would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9 and 110. And I know this because I have been studying his big picture of signs from morning until night for more than full-time hours for more than 7 years. And again, 9 and 10 are paired together in order to, well, provide the symbolism for 9/11, but it isn't only about pointing to 9/11. In other words, it's a tool that God uses to develop his big picture of signs through the use of 9/11 and the pairing of 9 and 110. Now, the 110 stories collapsed and then engendered a small earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, which was named after the 9-foot-high wall of security that the Dutch built to keep the British and the Indians out. Joshua led the Israelites around the walls of security before they collapsed in God's judgment, and he died at the age of 110. And the walls of security collapsed on Jericho after the Israelites blew trumpets. And on 9/11, trumpet, God's trumpet that he uses to trumpet and highlight his prophetic signs, he called into the Channel 9 TV news station and inadvertently trumpeted that his tower on Wall Street had become the tallest tower in Lower Manhattan. Okay, so there is a little bit of a background for you as to how, and also the 42nd anniversary of the New York City blackout was in 1977, which was the year of the release of Star Wars. In fact, Star Wars connects to the Manhattan blackout, but anyway, well, it's also an explosion, and that's what we're predicting here for March 22nd. Because, of course, the climax of the movie Star Wars is a big explosion of the Death Star. And actually, God has used other signs, including 6 + 6 + 6 days after the Manhattan blackout, which was the Star Wars Canyon plane crash in California. There is a canyon in California nicknamed the Star Wars Canyon because the Navy exercises their planes, flying them into the canyon walls of this canyon like Star Wars. And there are plane enthusiasts that sit on top of the canyon and look down into the cockpit as the pilots fly by. Except I guess they probably don't do that anymore. It's probably forbidden now because on that day when the crash happened, there were 7 tourists that were rushed to the hospital because they were inflicted by debris from the explosion of the airplane into the canyon walls. All right. And that was 6 + 6 + 6 days. The number of the Antichrist is 666. Anyway, I'm getting off track here. I want to stay focused on the Manhattan blackout. What I was saying is, what was I saying? Yes. Harrison Ford and his Star Wars career spanned 42 years, and it began in 1977. And his last Star Wars movie was in 2019. It's the same interval between the 2 blackouts in Manhattan. And the day of the Manhattan blackout was Harrison Ford's birthday. And anyway, there's lots more. I'm only just scratching the surface. And if I were to continue to go any further with the explanation of the Manhattan blackout, I would be dipping into the content of this video that was made a couple of years ago, for one thing. And so I'll just leave it at that. I've just now established the 9/11 symbolic significance in the Manhattan blackout. And as I'm saying again, it connects with exactly 9 × 11 + 9 × 11 + 9 × 11 weeks to the predicted follow-up to the warning of judgment on 9/11, which is this predicted 2 dirty bombs or a suitcase nuke and an emergency evacuation from Manhattan Island on March 22nd, 2025. Also, one other thing. Not only does God pair 9 and 110 together to confirm his signs and connections, he pairs 9 and 23 together to confirm the signs and connections. And I know these are the numbers, like I said. And That's because the basketball president who wore 23 was inaugurated in '09. Also, 23 is the 9th prime number, and also the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist is described in Ezekiel chapter 9, and it alters a person's 23 pairs of chromosomes. Well, anyway, exactly 923 months before the Manhattan Blackout was the official start date of the Manhattan Project. And that's nuclear bomb symbolism. The Manhattan Project was about developing the first atomic bomb, which is symbolism for what we are talking about with these dirty bombs or suitcase nuke, which will be made up of weapons-grade nuclear material. Right? That's what the Manhattan Project was about, and it connected to the Manhattan Blackout. This connection, incidentally, is how I knew back in 2019, after this prophetic sign, that this would be what God was pointing to. And it would be focused on a particular area of Manhattan, just like the Manhattan Blackout was focused on a particular area of Manhattan. Like I mentioned, it was Hell's Kitchen. Okay, so now the confirmation of that, second witness to that even, is the Hurricane Barry that hit on the day of the Manhattan Blackout. And Hurricane Barry was known for its power outages that it caused in Louisiana, the 6+6+6th state to join the Union. And the number of customers that were without power was reported to be 153,000, a prophetic number from the Bible, but also 153 is 9 times 17, and the Antichrist, Barry Obama, was president from '09 until 17. Barry, of course, changed his name to Barack when he became an adult. And who does that, by the way? Who changes their name from a good American name to something very foreign sounding as an adult? Well, someone who doesn't love America. Okay, and that's a fact. Barack Obama is a communist, and communists don't love America. They hate America. And so that'll be proven, by the way, in other videos that Barack Obama is a communist. I don't expect you to take my word for it, but when the prediction comes to pass, actually, I do expect you to take my word for it, because all of these controversial things that I say in these videos are proven to be true through God's true big picture of signs. And the big picture of signs, which is only being explained on this channel, will be proven to be true when the prediction comes to pass. And believe me, I know far better than you the reason and purpose for this prediction that is from God. And again, it is to prove these controversial things that I am saying. But let's see. There was also a prophetic explosion on the Table Rock Lake. Well, I've covered that let's see. Well, okay, so there was an explosion, because we are talking about a prediction for an explosion. We did have a prophetic explosion on July 13th, 2019 as well, which was the prophetic boat explosion and fire and evacuation, you could say, from the dock on Table Rock Lake, which is what makes it prophetic, because Table Rock Lake is extremely prophetic in God's signs, especially in regards to a boat, as I'll explain. So Table Rock Lake is named Rock, and the name, or rather I should say, Rock in the Bible is symbolic of Jesus. The Table Rock Lake has a maximum depth of 220 feet, which symbolizes rock, because the 220th word in the Strong's Greek Concordance is the word for rooster, which is symbolic of Peter, which is why on the tops of Catholic cathedrals are roosters. And the name Peter was given to Peter by Jesus. His name was Simon until he was renamed Peter. And in Greek, it is Petros, which is the masculine of, because in Greek there are masculine and feminine versions of words. The masculine version of Petra or Petros is Petros, and it means a rock or a stone, whereas Petra means bedrock. And Jesus said he would build his, well, Jesus asked his disciples who they think he is, and Peter was the first to say out loud that he is the Messiah. And then Jesus responded to Peter and gave him his new name, Petros, and said that on Petra, that he would build, on this Petra, he would build his church. He did not say he would build his church on Peter. That's blasphemy, for one thing, to say that the church would be built on a man, because if one understands the Bible correctly, man is inherently corrupt and more corrupt over time, which is why the Catholic Church has become more corrupt over time. And also, what one builds things on, structures, is bedrock, which is why the two different words. And that's the truth. If you look it up, there are two different words, and so this therefore disproves the entire Catholic religion, because their entire Catholic religion hinges on this one verse. They claim to have the authority to have all of the man-made religion on top of the Bible that they have through supposed popes that are supposedly descended from Peter. Well, Peter was never in Rome. And furthermore, Jesus didn't say what he said. And then even furthermore, just a few verses later, Jesus called Peter Satan. And so if he was to build his church on Peter, why then would he have called him Satan just a couple of verses later? But anyway, like I said, so 220 symbolizes rock, and Table Rock Lake is a maximum depth of 220 feet. And so what I'm getting at is the prophetic duck boat tragedy on Table Rock Lake in 2018, a year prior to this Manhattan blackout. On the day of the explosion of the boat on Table Rock Lake, we had another boat sign on Table Rock Lake a year earlier. And that was the sinking of the duck boat, which killed 17 people, 9 of which were from the same family. That's bringing us all full circle because, again, 9 times 17 is 153. And it was 153 fish that in Jesus' last miracle, in which the disciples caught in the net from the boat in John 21. It symbolizes the end of the age of fishing for men. And so the duck boat sank at sunset. That's part of the story and partly why it sank. They saw the storm coming. The pilot or the captain of the boat didn't really heed the warning signs of the storm coming, and the boat was sunk just before sunset, just like Jesus was crucified and died just before sunset. And then the boat was raised from the bottom of the 220-foot Table Rock Lake, Jesus. It was raised 3.5 days later in the early morning. That's right. It coincides or parallels the crucifixion and resurrection. And the day that it was raised from the bottom of 220 feet deep Table Rock Lake was the same day that the 220-pound stone rock fell from the western wall in Jerusalem on the 9th of Av. The 9th of Av is this solemn day in the Hebrew calendar that commemorates the collapsing of the temple walls and the temple in history, when the Babylonians breached the walls, destroyed the temple. The first and second temples were destroyed on the 9th of Av, and that was a coincidence because prior to the Romans also destroying the temple, they were held outside the walls, and then they finally broke through on the particular day. It was not planned. The Romans didn't say, hey, the Babylonians destroyed the temple on the 9th of Av. Let's do it again on the same date. It was a coincidence. Well, it wasn't a coincidence. It was designed by God, and that's a part of another bigger story. Very important one. In fact, one of the most important overarching stories of all of history. But anyway, because all of the major calamities for the Jews occurred on the 9th of Av, and that God did that in order to point back to the first and second temples being destroyed on the 9th of Av. Because in Deuteronomy chapter 26, God warned them that they would be exiled around the world, and then for rejecting him. And the question then is, how did the Jews reject God before they were exiled in 70 AD or after the Second Temple was destroyed in 70 AD. How did they reject God in the first century? Well, that was from or by rejecting Jesus, who claimed to be God. Now, so back to the parallel here. Table Rock Lake has almost the exact same water volume as the lake, the Sea of Galilee, on which the boat caught the 153 fish. The Sea of Galilee, or the lake, has almost also the exact same surface area as Table Rock Lake. And again, it was 9 from the same family, 17 deaths, which hints at 153, and it was 153 fish that were caught in the boat on the Sea of Galilee lake. Today, that boat that was used is in a museum on the north shore of the lake, and I think the only one that's saying that that's the case, but I know it's the case. I know that's the lake. I know that's the exact boat that the disciples used with the 153 fish. It was unearthed in the mud a few years ago it's been preserved in the mud all the centuries, and now it's in the museum, and I know it's the boat because that's exactly what God would do. It'll be on display during the Messianic kingdom of 1,000 years of peace when Jesus rules from Jerusalem. So also on the day of the sinking of the raising of the boat from the bottom of the 220-foot lake and the 220-pound stone that fell. By the way, the stone fell and hit the steps of the Gentile worship area, and that's because of the huge stone in Daniel chapter 2 that smashes the feet, as in the steps of the statue that symbolizes the times of the Gentiles. That's why the steps of the Gentile worship area were smashed on the 9th of Av with the 220-pound rock. And anyway, also on that day, the Knesset in Israel passed the Israeli Act, or the Israeli bill or law, declaring that Israel is a Jewish state. Not that I agree with that law. I'm just saying that that's symbolic, part of the restoration of Israel, symbolism of it anyway. Because what's coming, of course, is Jews in Israel persecuting other Jews that have become Christians, as if that's not already happening, but it will become quite intense in the end times. And part of that justification will be the use of this law and other laws. Anyway, so, but the point is that now I've established all of that in order to confirm for you the boat explosion on the day of the Manhattan blackout, on the day of the Hurricane Barry that knocked out the power for 9 times 17,000 people. All of this 153 number and the boat, Table Rock Lake. So, and it's an explosion, so I needed to get into that because it's leading again with 9 times 11 plus 9 times 11 plus 9 times 11 weeks exactly to the predicted explosions in New York City. Hurricane Barry hinted at Barack Obama, whose name was Barry. Hurricane Barry was known for its power outages that it caused and the 153,000 people in Louisiana without power. This 153,000 customers without power occurred on the same day as the boat explosion on Table Rock Lake, which hinted at the duck boat tragedy that killed 17 people, 9 of which were from the same family, and this hinted at 9 times 17 equals 153. The power outages caused by Hurricane Barry occurred on the same day as the Manhattan blackout power outage. In Bible prophecy, a period of 42 months is symbolic of the period of the Antichrist's rule. The Manhattan blackout occurred exactly 160 minutes, shy of exactly 42 years, after the New York City blackout in 1977. 160 minutes hints at 4 times 40, which hints at 4 times 4, which hints at 44, and this identifies the Antichrist, the 44th president. The infamous New York City blackout in 1977, that resulted in massive looting and crime began after a perfect storm of 3 separate lightning events. Con Edison called it an act of God, which it was. As explained earlier, Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven, and the name Barack Obama in Hebrew means lightning from heaven. The period of the Antichrist is described in the book of Daniel in chapter 9, verse 27. This is why at 9:27 p.m. on July 13th, 1977, the biggest generator in New York City, the 990 megawatt Ravenswood Generating Unit number 3, also known as Big Alice, shut down, and with it went all of New York City. The 990 megawatt Ravenswood generator shutting down at 9:27 p.m. identifies the 44th president as the Antichrist in Daniel 9:27, as the 44th triangular number is 990. 990 is also 9 times 110, which is a pairing of 9 and 110. I'll just take a couple of brief minutes here to explain why God pairs the numbers 9 and 110 together. Jesus' official arrival into Jerusalem and first coming was on the 10th day of the first month in the Hebrew calendar. This is 110, and this hints at the number 110. In the book of Joshua, the date on which the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan River and officially entered the Promised Land was also on the 10th day of the first month, which is 110 and hints at the number 110. Jesus' first coming is symbolized by the number 110. This is why on 9/11, the 2 towers that collapsed were each 110 stories high. The collapse of 2 towers that were 110 floors was symbolism for Jesus' second coming. In the book of Joshua in the Bible, Joshua died at the age of 110. Joshua led the Hebrews around the security walls of the ancient city of Jericho before they collapsed in judgment. On 9/11, the Twin Towers, which were 110 stories high, collapsed, engendering a small earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall, where George Washington was inaugurated, on Wall Street. President George Washington was a founding father, and his inauguration as the first president was a symbolic founding of the nation. The cracking of the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street on 9/11 symbolized America's foundation in God being cracked. This is because after Washington's inauguration at Federal Hall, he then walked down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel, where he consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its blessings. After 9/11, Trinity Chapel was called the Miracle Chapel, as it was the only building at Ground Zero to have survived. It did not even suffer a broken window due to the 70-year-old sycamore tree that was uprooted as it sheltered the chapel from the falling debris. In commemoration of this sycamore tree outside the chapel, today there is a huge bronze statue of its roots. In other words, through the 9/11 events, God was pointing to Trinity Chapel and Washington's covenantal consecration of the nation to God at Trinity Chapel. Wall Street is named after the original 9-foot-high wall of security that the Dutch built to keep the British and the Indians out. The collapse of 110 floors that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, which is named after a 9-foot-high security wall, hints at 9/11 and points to Joshua, who died at 110, and the Hebrews that marched around the walls of security before they collapsed in judgment. 110 floors and the 9-foot-high wall of security that was Wall Street points to George Washington's march down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel that symbolized a covenantal relationship between America and God. To this effect, Washington's march down Wall Street with the New York Stock Exchange, the building that symbolizes America's financial strength, located on one side of the street, and Federal Hall, the building that symbolizes America's governmental and institutional strength on the other side, also pointed to the cutting rights ritual practiced in ancient Israel that was used in Abraham's and God's ritual walk in their covenant that is described in Genesis 15. A covenant that symbolizes Washington's walk down Wall Street and his covenantal consecration of the nation to God at Trinity Chapel. There are only two nations in the history of the world that were founded not on ethnicity or territory or language, but were founded solely for God, Israel and America. In every daily Bible that is divided into 365 readings, a portion of the Bible for each day of the year, on every September 11th, everyone that reads this standard 365-day Bible reads the passage in the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, verse 11, which is the judgment warning on ancient Israel, which was a raid on ancient Israel by the world's first recorded terrorists, the ancient Assyrians. And the terrorists on 9/11 were from the same part of the world. The Assyrians raided the northern kingdom of Israel first, and then later the southern kingdom of Judah was destroyed, which is why the terrorists on 9/11 hit the North Tower first, followed 17 minutes later by the South Tower. And this Isaiah 9:11 passage includes a mention of collapsed buildings and uprooted sycamore trees. On the morning after 9/11, Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle gave a speech to the world regarding the events on 9/11. He quoted the passage in Isaiah 9:11, not realizing it was a judgment warning on the ancient Jews. He quoted how, after the raid by the Assyrians, the Hebrews did not repent to God, but instead vowed defiantly to rebuild and become stronger than before. And so, like the ancient Jews, America did not repent after the judgment warning, and instead defied God even more. And so, like ancient Israel, America will now be destroyed. This is why, in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, he frequently pairs together the number 110 and the number 9. Both of these numbers symbolize God's judgment on the nation, and paired together, these numbers point to the big judgment warning that was 9/11. As well, these numbers paired together in God's signs and connections serve as a witness confirmation that the perceived signs and connections are from God. After the judgment warning of 9/11, America was given a period of grace to repent and turn back to God, or else judgment destruction. In the Bible, a 20-year period symbolizes a complete period of waiting. Jacob waited 20 years to get possession of his wives and property. The children of Israel waited 20 years to be freed of Jabin, the king of Canaan, when they were freed from bondage by Deborah and Barak. The Ark of the Covenant waited 20 years in Kiriath Jearim, and Solomon spent 20 years building his home and the house of God. On the 20th anniversary of the buildings that collapsed on 9/11 was the sudden collapse of America's presence in Afghanistan, and the iconic scene of this was the U.S. Air Force plane leaving the airport in Afghanistan, and the big number on the side of its plane is 1109, which hints at 110 and 9. The number 42 symbolizes the Antichrist in Bible prophecy, and the Manhattan Blackout in 2019 occurred on the 42nd anniversary of the 1977 New York City Blackout, and it was initially reported in the 2019 Manhattan Blackout that 42,000 customers were without power. This was later revised to 72,000 people without power. The area of the blackout was from 42nd Street to 72nd Street. This was mostly the area known as Hell's Kitchen. The blackout occurred in the middle of a heat wave, and the residents were said to be suffering without air conditioning, which hinted at the suffering in hell. Times Square is located on 42nd Street. Later in the evening, power was restored to half of Times Square and Broadway. Half of Broadway was lit up, and the other half remained in the dark. This occurred on the date July 13th, 713, and this is because in the book of Matthew, chapter 7, verse 13, it says that broad is the way to destruction. Enter ye in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. This was what was communicated from God with half of Broadway with its crowds of people in the middle of July in the dark, while the other half remained lit up. God was communicating to choose the straight gate, the narrow way, which, as Jesus said, is hard, and it is few people that will find this narrow gate. The Manhattan Blackout in 2019 is also known for the casts of the 2 Broadway musicals that put on an impromptu street performance during the power outage. One of them was the cast of the musical Hadestown, which had recently won the Tony Award for Best Musical. And Hadestown gives this Manhattan Blackout prophetic sign more Antichrist symbolism. The other street performance was given by the cast of the musical Come From Away. The story of this musical is about the events that occurred in Newfoundland, Canada on the day of 9/11. Thus giving this Manhattan Blackout prophetic sign 9/11 symbolism. 9/11 was God's judgment warning for America to repent that pointed to Isaiah chapter 9 verse 10 through 11. The number 19 hints at Isaiah 9:10, and it is also symbolism for God's perfect judgment. As from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment, and the number 10 symbolizes God's perfect order. Hence 19, which is 9 plus 10, symbolizes God's perfect judgment. In the Manhattan Blackout, Madison Square Gardens lost power, where at the time Jennifer Lopez was performing a concert. This Jennifer Lopez concert in Manhattan was exactly 199 months after the Jennifer Lopez movie Made in Manhattan was released. Jennifer Lopez was born in New York City. She has a famous song about how she is from New York City, and this is the prophetic significance of the name Made in Manhattan. She was, in a way, made in Manhattan. The number 199 hints at 19 and the number 9, and therefore is symbolic of God's judgment. The reason why God has incorporated this movie Made in Manhattan is because a central theme in the movie involves Richard Nixon. President Richard Nixon is famous for a couple of things. Most importantly, his weaponization of the federal government against his political enemies, which is exactly what is going on today. And so God is using this to warn people about what is really going on with the federal government right now. Richard Nixon used the federal intelligence agencies as a weapon, and today the CIA is a government within the government and is completely corrupt. But this is just an understatement. Also, President Nixon was the only president to have used the 25th Amendment when he appointed Gerald Ford as his vice president after his first vice president resigned due to a corruption scandal. Gerald Ford became the 40th vice president, and exactly 120 weeks later, he announced his national immunization campaign, which involved things that inject into people due to the hysteria, fear over a virus in 1976. The 40th vice president and the 120 weeks connection to this thing that people inject hints at God's judgment, as in the account of Noah's flood, God said to Noah that the flood judgment would begin after a period of 120 years, which a period of 120 weeks hints at. And in the flood judgment, the flood waters increased for 40 days. Hence why Gerald Ford was the 40th vice president, exactly 120 weeks before he announced his plan to inject the things into every American. Incidentally, this plan didn't work because of the effects that occurred on the side, if you know what I mean. The flood judgment hints at Watergate, because in the flood account, the waters burst forth from the deep, which is what a Watergate hints at, and Gerald Ford became the president because of Watergate. Gerald Ford was the only president to never have been elected vice president or president, just like Barack Obama will become the president again and overcome the 22nd Amendment's restriction from someone being elected to the office more than twice. He will be appointed instead, which is a big reason why God uses Gerald Ford in his Signs and Connections, and this is why this Made in Manhattan movie, which has a moral theme in it involving Richard Nixon, and Richard Nixon is known for his immoral activities surrounding Watergate, and as a result, Gerald Ford became the president. The point being here is that there are a lot of prophetic parallels between Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Watergate, the virus scare of 1976, and the coming Antichrist, Barack Obama. Which is why in this trail of signs that is being explained in this video, which is leading to the date it is predicted that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan, is ultimately leading to increased further persecution of the political cult of the left's political opponents, conservative Christians, through the weaponization of the government. This was Jennifer Lopez's last tour to celebrate her 50th birthday, which was 11 days after her concert in the Manhattan Blackout. From the Bible, the number 11 is symbolic of the execution of God's judgment. Jennifer Lopez was born in New York City 50 years before her concert in New York City during the Manhattan Blackout. In the Bible, a 50-year period is prophetic, and Manhattan suffered the peak of COVID-19 on the 50th anniversary of the first legalization of abortion in the 50th state. And Trump, who was born in Queens, New York, and is from Manhattan, announced a national emergency on the exact 50th anniversary of the first legalization of abortion in the 50th state. Babies that are aborted are not born, and this is what the birth of Jennifer Lopez in New York City 50 years before the blackout in Manhattan in New York City hints at. Jennifer Lopez is now known for having taken a strong stance in support of women's right to an abortion after her message on Instagram after the Supreme Court overruled Roe v. Wade, when Jennifer Lopez said, "We are living in an America I don't recognize. I stand with you and for women's rights in this country." Jennifer Lopez is the 17th highest-grossing female artist worldwide this century in terms of concert sales, and she sold 1.7 million tickets, which hints at 17. Her 2019 concert tour and concert in Manhattan during the Manhattan Blackout was 17 years after the release of her movie Made in Manhattan. This is because on 9/11, the two planes struck the two towers in Manhattan 17 minutes apart. Her Manhattan concert was exactly 199 months after her movie Made in Manhattan, because the Manhattan Blackout was exactly 23 weeks after the date 2/3, February 3rd, which hints at 23, and the day that the GOAT of football, Tom Brady, won the Super Bowl. There are many prophetic signs that confirm this 23 weeks connection. For example, the date 2/3, which hints at 23 itself, the signs within the Super Bowl that were also pairs of 2 and 3, but also this Super Bowl was exactly 2,300 days after the 23rd anniversary of the 1989 World Series earthquake in the San Francisco Bay Area. And on the 23rd anniversary, a huge fireball flew at low altitude over the San Francisco Bay Area. In Daniel chapter 8, a period of 2,300 days is associated with the timing of the Antichrist, and that chapter is about a battle between a goat and a ram, and Tom Brady is the GOAT, greatest of all time, and in this Super Bowl, he played the Rams. Also, this was Super Bowl 53, and 53 is the 16th prime number, and God uses 16 to hint at 4 times 4 and the 44th president, and God pairs 23 and 44 together to confirm his signs and connections, as the 44th president, the basketball president, wore jersey number 23, and also Tom Brady in this GOAT versus the Rams Super Bowl, the Rams quarterback was player number 16, which also hints at 4 times 4 and 44, which pairs with this 23. Also, the Manhattan Blackout was on the 42nd anniversary of the 1977 New York City Blackout, as was already explained, and in 1977 was the year of the release of the movie Star Wars, starring Harrison Ford, and Harrison Ford's Star Wars career spanned 42 years. 2019 was the last Star Wars movie with Harrison Ford in it. On the Super Bowl date, there was a sign involving Harrison Ford as he starred in one of the, or if not the biggest commercial of the Super Bowl, and Super Bowls are known for their commercials. He starred as himself, Harrison Ford, in the Amazon commercial that was about a blackout. It was about a worldwide blackout, and 23 weeks later was the Manhattan Blackout. And this 23 weeks later and the Manhattan Blackout on July 13th, 2019, was Harrison Ford's 77th birthday, and it was the 42nd anniversary of the 1977 blackout. And Harrison Ford was born in Chicago, where the GOAT Antichrist is from. Also on the day of the Super Bowl was a prophetic plane crash in Yorba Linda, California, in which Kamala Harris tweeted her condolences because she was at that time the senator from California, and Yorba Linda is the location of the Richard Nixon Library, and again, Richard Nixon used the 25th Amendment to appoint Gerald Ford, and that's why Harrison Ford, his two names, they hint at two presidents, President Harrison and Gerald Ford. Harrison because President Grover Cleveland was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms. He skipped the presidency of Benjamin Harrison, and that's also how it points to Barack Obama, who will also serve non-consecutive terms, skipping the presidency of President Trump, God's trumpet that is trumpeting the arrival of the Antichrist. Also, this plane crash was in Los Angeles on the same day that the football team from Los Angeles was in the Super Bowl, being led by a quarterback that had the jersey number 16, which hints at 4 times 4 and the 44th president. And this 44th president will become president again and serve non-consecutive terms and be appointed through the 25th Amendment after Kamala Harris, who was from California, will die in a plane crash on her flight from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, where this plane crashed on the day of this Super Bowl. And Barack Obama will become president again after Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, and that's why Harrison Ford is known for his aviation mishaps. Harrison hints at Harris, and why this aviation mishap, this plane crash in Yorba Linda, California on the day of the Harrison Ford commercial, on the day of the Super Bowl, 23 weeks exactly before the Manhattan Blackout. And the concert of Jennifer Lopez, which is again, and the point of all of this is that her concert was exactly 199 months after the release of the movie Made in Manhattan, which contains a moral theme regarding Richard Nixon. Tom Brady is known for being selected 199th in his college draft. And in this case, this connects with the 199 months between Lopez's Made in Manhattan movie and Lopez's concert during the Manhattan Blackout. Tom Brady was selected 199th and was never supposed to be a starting quarterback, but Tom Brady, player number 12, replaced the starting quarterback for the Patriots, player 11, 12 days after 9/11. After this quarterback, Drew Bledsoe, player number 11, was hit hard by a New York Jets linebacker and almost bled to death, which is why his name is Bledsoe. And this hints at the Jets that hit hard the two towers on 9/11 that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union. And the first plane was Flight 11, which had a crew of 11 people, because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness, and in English is an idiom that means last chance. Time is running out, as in last chance for America to repent, which is what the 9/11 judgment warning was. And Tom Brady ended up becoming the GOAT of football. In the Bible, GOAT is symbolism for the Antichrist. The GOAT of football went into that Super Bowl in 2019 with 17 Super Bowl records, and with that Super Bowl, him and his coach, Bill Belichick, had been in 9 of the 11 Super Bowls that the New England Patriots had been in. The reason for Brady's 17 Super Bowl records, which connects to Jennifer Lopez being the 17th highest grossing female artist and selling 1.7 million tickets, which hints at 17, and her concert in the Manhattan Blackout 17 years after her Made in Manhattan movie, is because that Super Bowl in 2019 was 17 years after the Patriots' first Super Bowl win, in the Super Bowl shortly after 9/11, when the two towers were struck 17 minutes apart. And the prophetic significance of this 17 minutes in between the two planes that struck the two towers is that after the first plane struck the North Tower, no one knew for sure whether it was an accident or an act of terrorism. 17 minutes later, as the world watched live and in horror the second plane strike the second tower, it was confirmed that it was an act of terrorism and judgment from God. In other words, the two planes striking two towers is a second witness confirmation. As the Bible says, second and third witnesses are required to confirm a matter. That Super Bowl right after 9/11 is known for its last-minute winning drive, in which Brady and the Patriots started from their 17-yard line with the score tied at 17-17. This last-minute drive from the 17-yard line with the two teams tied at 17-17, including the team from Boston and the Rams, which now play in Los Angeles, and 17 years later, the Patriots again played the Rams, who were from Los Angeles, hinted at the 17 minutes in between when the two planes struck the two towers that were flights from Boston to Los Angeles. The winning field goal was kicked by player number 4 in the final play of the fourth quarter at the end of the game. That kicker went on to win 4 Super Bowls and become the GOAT of football kicking, which hinted at the 44th president Antichrist GOAT. The reason for going into this connection between the Super Bowl after 9/11 and the Manhattan Blackout is that this last tour of Jennifer Lopez was her 4th concert tour. On the same day as her concert during the Manhattan Blackout, during her 4th concert tour, there was a 4.0 magnitude earthquake in Manhattan, Montana. A record-setting earthquake for the local area, and it occurred exactly 9 months and 11 days after the swarm of earthquakes began there. this 9 months and 11 days connection to this prophetic earthquake in Manhattan, Montana, on the day of the Manhattan Blackout and during the Manhattan Blackout, of course, hints at the events of 9/11 in Manhattan. The 4.0 earthquake in Manhattan, Montana occurred during the time of the Manhattan Blackout, in which Lopez was performing in her 4th concert tour, which hinted at the 44th president. From the Bible, the number 9 is the most important number as it symbolizes God's judgment. The Manhattan earthquake on the day of the Manhattan Blackout was one of 9 prophetic signs spaced 9 days apart that began on Pentecost in 2019, June 16th, the day that a rare 3.2 magnitude earthquake occurred right at Jericho, Washington State. And this was at the end of a trail of signs that was parallel with the timing of events in the book of Joshua, which climaxed with the walls of security collapsing on the ancient city of Jericho due to an earthquake. In other words, this prophetic sign was expected ahead of time, and when I found out that the earthquake occurred in Jericho at the end of this trail of signs that we were following that led to Pentecost, that were parallel with the timing of events in the book of Joshua, I had to go for a long walk. Joshua died at the age of 110. Joshua led the Hebrews around the ancient walls of security of the ancient city of Jericho, and 110 days exactly before this earthquake in Jericho, Washington State, was the day that the walls of security collapsed. The Jerusalem wall of security collapsed, a portion of it, due to heavy rains. And 110 weeks before this Jericho, Washington State earthquake was the tunnel walls that collapsed on rail cars carrying plutonium, which necessitated a complete evacuation of the Hanford nuclear site, which is literally just a few miles downstream on the Columbia River. The Hanford nuclear site is the location where the first plutonium for the first atomic bomb was made. God uses Columbia to symbolize America, as does Washington State symbolize America. And exactly 110 months before this Jericho earthquake was the day that the 100-foot section of wall collapsed at the Mount Vernon High School. And Mount Vernon is symbolism for Washington, Mount Vernon's estate, or Washington's Mount Vernon estate. 9 days after that was the rare 0.9 magnitude earthquake in Queens, New York, where Trump is from, or where he was born, and Trump is a trumpet, trumpeting judgment, and the walls of Jericho collapsed due to an earthquake after the trumpets were blown. And this earthquake was between 9th and 11th Street, right across the East River from Manhattan. And it occurred at 7:26 p.m., which hinted at the 726th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance, which is the word for rapture, which is the event when God's faithful will be rescued from the Antichrist at the sounding of the trumpet. And then 9 days after that was the prophetic July 4th earthquake in Ridgecrest, California. And these are explained in other videos, by the way. And the prophetic sign in this earthquake was the viral video of the school play put on that morning, in which the young students, the young kids, were on stage singing their July 4th songs. And also the play was commemorating the anniversary of the Transcontinental Railroad, and that was also, there were more Transcontinental Railroad prophetic signs in that year, 2019. That was very important in America's history, America's manifest destiny, God's hand on American history. Anyway, as the kids' sledgehammers came down, that's when the earthquake happened. Right at the moment, it was a symbolism for God's gavel in judgment coming down, and the wall in the background of the play, it collapsed, which gave this Joshua symbolism. This wall was right behind the big American flag that was hanging there, and that was the sign. This wall collapsed, and then the camera pans around chaotically, but then pauses briefly on the American flag before continuing its chaos. In other words, God pointed to America. and then the camera goes dark, and I assume the electricity goes out, and the kids are screaming. It's quite disturbing, especially when you understand that it is a prophetic sign of God's judgment on America. This earthquake occurred in Ridgecrest, California. Ridgecrest is symbolism for a wall. It was a 7.1 magnitude earthquake, and the media, the national media, kept reporting and saying how it was the strongest earthquake in 20 years. The media kept saying how it was the strongest earthquake in 20 years. This earthquake on America's birthday, July 4th, symbolic of America. Since the 7.0 magnitude earthquake in Joshua Tree, California in 1999, little did the media know that this earthquake in Ridgecrest, California was exactly 20 biblical years since the Joshua Tree, California earthquake. It wasn't just the strongest in roughly 20 years, it was exactly 20 biblical years. A biblical prophetic year is made up of 12 months of 30 days each. And in the Bible, a period of 20 years is symbolism for a complete, perfect period of waiting. God waiting for America to repent is what this symbolized. And then 9 days after that was the 4.0 earthquake in Manhattan, Montana, on the day or during the Manhattan blackout. And this earthquake and Manhattan, Montana are directly situated directly on top of the magma plume of Yellowstone volcano. And 9 days after that was the day of the biblical floods in New York City, and on the day of the prophetic earthquake in Joshua Tree National Park, Joshua 3 sets of 7 earthquake. Joshua Park is a wilderness. This occurred in the middle of Joshua Tree National Park. It was a significant earthquake. It was statistically a significant earthquake. It made news. It was a national news story. I forget the magnitude. It was above 4 though. It occurred at 9:27 a.m., and God uses the time 9:27 to hint at the verse that symbolizes or is regarding the end times period, including the Antichrist in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, the end times verse. 9.9 miles south, and this was in the news stories. It was listed as 9.9 miles south of 29 Palms, and Psalm 29, which is what 29 Palms hints at, is the voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness, and that's what an earthquake in the middle of Joshua Tree National Park is, and a voice of the Lord shaking the wilderness. This was on the same day as the 9-year-old girl was tossed, I think, I wouldn't be surprised, 9 feet high in the air by the bison right next to Old Faithful Geyser in Yellowstone National Park, another national park symbolism sign, which is confirmed by the earthquake in Joshua Tree National Park. And this year, Old Faithful Geyser was having its all-time record year of eruptions, which was pointing to, including the girl being tossed into the air, was symbolic of an eruption, and all of this was pointing to, of course, the coming eruption of Yellowstone volcano, which will destroy America. Again, the number 9 from the Bible is symbolism for God's judgment. The 9-year-old girl was tossed into the air in this series of prophetic signs that were spaced at 9-day intervals. And also this girl was from Florida. This was part of the news stories in the national news stories that mentions how she's from Florida, and that is because Florida is the 27th state to join the Union. And God uses the number 27 as an emphasis of the number 9. 27 is 9 plus 9 plus 9. And in any way, all of this continues on for the 9 signs spaced at 9 days apart to the climax, which was the earthquake in Hutchinson, Kansas, one of 3 extremely prophetic earthquakes that were 4.0 or greater in Hutchinson, Kansas. And there have only been and there have only been 3 earthquakes 4.0 or greater in Hutchinson, Kansas. And long story short, this was all pointing to Anne Hutchinson, the leader of the Free Grace movement in the spiritual founding of America at the Boston colony, for which her and her followers were banished and then later murdered by Native Indians. And today, the vast majority of evangelicals have some degree or all of the free grace doctrine, which Jesus says he hates and has clearly demonstrated through his prophetic signs to be the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day, which Jesus says he hates, and is coming to make war on with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine, as he says in Revelation chapter 2. Pentecost symbolizes the church, and that's why this trail of 9 prophetic signs, including these earthquakes, spaced at 9-day intervals, begins on Pentecost with the rare earthquake in Jericho, Washington State, and ends with this prophetic earthquake in Hutchinson, Kansas. It's judgment for the church. The Anne Hutchinson earthquakes and other things will be explained more in other videos. Don't want to get off onto too much of a tangent, but also make sure that you watch the 23 church signs video on this channel, arguably one of the most, or maybe the most important video on this channel. As Peter said, judgment begins with the church, and God is very, very displeased with the American church, including the evangelical church, which is the church of Laodicea. God has also demonstrated that. The American evangelical church is the church of Laodicea that thinks it is in need of nothing because of its heretical doctrine, its Anne Hutchinson doctrine, its free grace, easy believism, cheap grace doctrine, once saved, always saved doctrine, also properly known as antinomianism, which is also very much Calvinism and Lutheran Reformed theology. The 4.0 earthquake in Manhattan, Montana, was located on the latitudinal line of 45 degrees. This is because this earthquake in Manhattan, Montana, on the day of the Manhattan Blackout and Hurricane Barry and the boat explosion on Table Rock Lake on July 13th, 2019, is exactly 45 months before it is predicted that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan. Again, this earthquake that was in Manhattan, Montana, was located on the 45th latitudinal line, and it is exactly 45 months before it is predicted a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan. 45 is the 9th triangular number, and from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. Also, 45 is a multiple of 9. It is 9 times 5, and also 45 hints at 4 plus 5 equals 9. All of this 9 symbolism contained in the number 45 is why President Trump, God's trumpet, trumpeting judgment, was the 45th president. President Trump is from Manhattan. And that's why the earthquake in Manhattan, Montana, on the 45th latitudinal line during the Manhattan Blackout is 45 months to the date it is predicted that there will be a dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan. This video was produced prior to May 4th, 2023. May 4th, or the date 5-4, as we now know, hints at the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, the first black regiment in the Civil War, and the reason God has used this theme is because it conveys the theme of slavery and freedom, which is the overarching theme of the Bible and of this life, and the current end times spiritual battle, the battle to end all battles, that we are all involved in right now. This is why, for example, on April 13th, the S&P 500 stock index gained 54 points, and the prophetic hockey game involving the team from Massachusetts had a final score of 5-4, which hinted at the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. This is also why, on April 13th, the 21-year-old document leaker was arrested in Massachusetts 21 days before the date 5-4, which hints at 54. Arguably, the most important video on this channel, at least in regards to the prediction of the dirty bomb in Manhattan, is the 54th Massachusetts Regiment video. Once the prediction comes to pass, you should know that all of the videos on this channel should be watched. However, there are a few top videos, such as the 54th Massachusetts Regiment video, the East Palestine video, the Obama Returns to the White House video, the 3 Mile Island accident video, and the Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory video. As you watch this video that you are currently watching, keep in mind that it was produced before May 4th, when it was believed that it would be the date of the predicted dirty bomb in Manhattan. However, May 4th turned out to be the penultimate date that is leading to February 3rd. In fact, the trail of signs between May 4th and February 3rd goes through the date December 2nd, and December 2nd, 12/2, hints at 212 and 212, the area code of Manhattan, and the date 12/2, which hints at 212, is 212 days after May 4th. This is why one of the prophetic signs on May 4th was the law passed by the 12th state to join the Union, restricting abortion to 12 weeks. The 12th state and 12 weeks for abortions hints at 12 to the power of 2, which hints at 212, and hints at the date 12/2, and hints at adding 212 days to May 4th to reach the date 12/2. The penultimate step in the trail of signs leading to the predicted dirty bomb in New York, the first state to table a law to legalize abortions. In other words, the bomb in New York will be judgment for abortions. To learn about the profound prophetic signs that occurred on December 2nd and how they confirm adding exactly 9 weeks to reach the date of the predicted dirty bomb or suitcase nuke in New York on February 3rd, watch the very important Okinawa Obama video. The 4.0 earthquake in Manhattan, Montana hints at the number 40, which in the Bible is a number that symbolizes God's judgment, as for example, in the account of Noah's flood, the flood waters increased for 40 days. On the day of the 4.0 earthquake in Manhattan, Montana, there were flood symbolism signs, including Hurricane Barry, the boat explosion on Table Rock Lake, as well as the flooding that occurred backstage of the theater that hosts the musical The Lion King. This was a news story because the musical is known for its costumes, and the costumes were damaged in the flood, and the cast had to perform without their costumes for a few days. 50 days after this flood, in the theater of the Lion King musical, on the day of Jennifer Lopez's concert for her 50th birthday, and the day of the blackout in Hell's Kitchen, and the impromptu street performance by the musical Hadestown, was a deadly flash flood in Hell's Gate Canyon National Park in Kenya, the location that inspired the movie The Lion King, the same area of southwest Kenya in which the 44th president was born. And this flash flood in the location that inspired the movie The Lion King, where the 44th president was born, was 44 days after the release of the new Lion King movie, which is stunning confirmation from God that indeed the 44th president was in fact born in southwest Kenya near Hell's Gate Canyon National Park. In the new live-action The Lion King movie that was released on July 19th, 2019, James Earl Jones reprised his role as Mufasa, the Lion King. James Earl Jones also starred in the most iconic baseball movie ever made, Field of Dreams, in which he delivered a speech which was about how America could be great again. And on this same day as this flash flood in the location that inspired the movie The Lion King, the Washington, D.C. Nationals baseball team was in the national sports media news for comically holding players up in the Simba cam. The Simba cam is when the stadium's camera will focus on a fan in the stadium while they hold up their baby or their dog, mimicking the iconic scene in the movie The Lion King when baby Simba is lifted up for everyone to see. In other words, this was a baseball Lion King prophetic sign. The two players that were held up, and only two players, were player 2 and player 22, coincidentally, because George Washington was born on the date 2/22, and this was the Washington Nationals, and God used the 9/11 events to point to George Washington and his inauguration on Federal Hall on Wall Street, and then his march down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel, the only building at Ground Zero that survived the falling debris on 9/11 and survived without a scratch or a broken window, because in Trinity Chapel, George Washington consecrated the nation to God, saying, paraphrasing, that if America were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its divine blessing and protection. This date of this SimbaCam sign that pointed to George Washington through player 2 and 22 was on September 1st, 2019, which is 9/1/19, which hints at 9/11. And not only does this 44 days connection here reveal and confirm that the 44th president was born in southwest Kenya near Hell's Gate Canyon National Park, but this connection to this baseball game in Washington, D.C. involving the Washington Nationals and this connection to James Earl Jones, who starred in the most iconic baseball movie ever made, this 44 days connection confirms with Hell's Gate Canyon that the Antichrist is the 44th president who will be the president and will become the president again in Washington, D.C. God is using James Earl Jones, the voice of the Lion King, to hint at the upcoming explosion on the surface of the sun and the coronal mass ejection that will hit Earth and cause catastrophic power outages. The coming coronal mass ejection that will hit Earth will also trigger the eruption of Yellowstone volcano, and the location of Manhattan, Montana, the location of the prophetic earthquake, is located directly on top of the magma plume of Yellowstone volcano. This flood backstage of the Lion King that pointed to the coming eruption on the surface of the sun occurred during the Manhattan blackout and occurred at the time of what is known as Manhattan Henge. Manhattan Henge is when the setting of the sun is perfectly aligned with the skyscraper canyon walls of Manhattan. This event occurs twice in a year. In 2019, Manhattan Henge, the event of Manhattan Henge, occurred during the Manhattan blackout. Or, better said, the Manhattan blackout occurred during Manhattan Henge, because God used the Manhattan blackout to point to Manhattan Henge. The flash flood of Hell's Gate Canyon 50 days later also hinted at the canyon walls of Manhattan in the Manhattan Henge event. In the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 14, God tells us that the lights in the sky are for prophetic signs. The brightest light in the sky is the sun, and this event of Manhattan Henge just happened to occur during the Manhattan blackout. It was a prophetic sign that pointed to the sun and the upcoming catastrophic power outage blackouts that will be caused by an eruption on the surface of the sun, which is predicted to occur on February 22nd, 2024. Manhattan Henge in 2019 was an exceptional Manhattan Henge because of the view during the Manhattan blackout when the lights of the city were out. It is said that Manhattan Henge is best viewed from 42nd Street. Times Square is located on 42nd Street, and Broadway surrounds Times Square, including the musical The Lion King, And the flood backstage of the musical Lion King hints at the coming judgment from the sun through also the symbolic use of James Earl Jones, the voice of the Lion King, because as will be explained in other videos, the eruption of the sun will be symbolic of a lion's roar. 50 Days connection between the flood backstage of the Lion King in the Manhattan Blackout and the flash flood in Hell's Gate Canyon, the location that inspired the movie The Lion King, is judgment warning for the church. The number 3000 is also symbolic of the church, as 3,000 souls came to faith on Pentecost when the church was born. 3,000 is also symbolic of judgment, as after their rebellion at Mount Sinai, it was, quote, about 3,000, end quote, souls that perished in God's judgment. On 9/11, about 3,000 souls perished, and the official total was 2,996, because God pointed to this about 3,000 that perished as judgment that is recorded in the book of Exodus. Exactly 3,000 days before the Manhattan Blackout was the day that Barack Obama told the biggest lie in history, when he finally presented a digital copy of his long-form birth certificate, which was proven to be a forgery after the sheriff of the sixth biggest city in the US, after no one else would do it, hired independent forensic labs in Europe to conduct a forensic analysis. It was concluded that the digital document was a forged, layered document with 9 points of obvious forgery. The wicked mainstream media will never report this, though, because there is no such thing as journalism anymore. Journalism has turned into social activism, and the left is fighting a literal civil war against their arch enemy, conservative Christians, and in any war, the first casualty is the truth. And the left controls the mainstream media, and the political philosophy of the left is that the ends justify the means, which is why the left is evil. 3 days after the birth certificate forgery was presented to the public, Obama made a joke about it at the annual White House press correspondents' dinner, in which he suggested that the iconic birth scene in the movie The Lion King was the location of his birth, which was actually the truth. And this was exactly 3,000 days before the Manhattan Blackout and the flood backstage of the theater that hosts the musical The Lion King, which is in turn 50 days, and both 3,000 days and 50 days both symbolize the church, and the flood in the musical The Lion King was 50 days to the flash flood in Hell's Gate Canyon in southwest Kenya, the location that inspired the movie The Lion King, on the day that the Washington Nationals were in the news for the Simba Cam comedy, which is all confirmation that Obama's comedy regarding where he was born was the biggest lie ever told in history, and is stunning confirmation from God that in fact Barack Obama was born in southwest Kenya near Hell's Gate Canyon. And this, my friends, is all confirmation from God and communication from God that the progressive secular left is the enemy of God. If you are listening to this and you were confused 10, 15 years ago and you voted for Obama, you need to repent. God is letting you know that you need to repent. The politics of the left is evil. This isn't only a civil war between Republicans and Democrats. It is a civil war between truth and lie, good and evil. One thing to add here is that this SimbaCam with the Washington Nationals, this SimbaCam comedy with the Washington Nationals during the ballpark game, which by the way hints at the national park, Hell's Gate Canyon, Park and Park. This SimbaCam was 50 days after the flood backstage of the theater that hosts the musical The Lion King. This team, the Washington Nationals, went on to win the World Series that year, which was very prophetic, extremely prophetic, and it's explained in other videos. to be their first World Series win in their franchise history of 50 years. It was their 50th year of franchise history, and then they finally won the World Series, which is more confirmation of this 50 days connection. But also, the story of when they won the World Series was how their start to the season was a miserable start to their first 50 games. This is the new story. It talks about how their first 50 games was terrible. I forget the record, but it was literally talked about being the first 50 games, and it's all about this number 50 here, as explained in the other videos. It goes back to their team being in Montreal, which is French for Mount Royal, which is symbolism for the Temple Mount, and Barack Obama being on the Temple Mount, and the prophetic World Series against the Astros, which is explained in other videos. And this connection is confirmation from God that proves beyond a doubt that the birth certificate is a forgery and that he told the biggest lie in history. And characteristic of how the Antichrist would perform, he presented it as a joke. In this same comedy speech, as his joke about the movie The Lion King, Obama played a pre-recorded skit that presented him in a satire of the movie The King's Speech, which was a movie about the King of England's voice, which again is hinting at the upcoming lion's roar on the surface of the sun. Two more quick things to add here. The first 50 games of their season, they ended up being in last place. And so it was a rags to riches story, which added to the prophetic flavor or significance of the prophetic sign. All right, this is a good place to interject this amazing new discovery. The day of the Manhattan Blackout on July 13th, 2019 is exactly 229 weeks to the date it is predicted that there will be a explosion, a bomb, a dirty bomb, or bombs plural, or a suitcase nuke, and evacuation in New York City on December 2nd, 2023. This exact 229 weeks is very interesting and, in fact, amazing, because the 229th number, well, the number 229 is the 50th prime number. And this is relevant because of what I just explained. Because this Simbacam and Flash Flood and Hell's Gate Canyon was exactly 50 days after the Hades Town musical performance in the street because of the Manhattan Blackout, and the blackout in the area of Hell's Kitchen, and the flood backstage of the theater that hosts the movie The Lion King. It is clear, in other words, beyond clear, the relevance of this 50 days connection. And therefore, one reason for this is to hint at this exact 229 weeks connection from July 13th, 2019, the Manhattan Blackout, because it is the 50th prime number. And so all along, from way back in 2019, with this amazing 50-day connection, God was revealing the date of the explosion in Manhattan. And by the way, I knew in July of 2019, I suspected strongly, I take that back, I knew. But I suspected strongly that the isolated area of the Hell's Kitchen area of Manhattan being the location for the blackout was a hint at a location within Manhattan for the destruction from a bomb. And then, I believe it was in July or soon after, in 2019, it was discovered that the Manhattan Blackout was exactly 923 months after the first official day of the Manhattan Project. God pairs 9 and 23 to confirm his signs, and so I knew back then that the 923 months connection was huge, and that Manhattan Project hints at a nuclear bomb. And so it was quite clear back then that this area of Hell's Kitchen with the blackout was a hint at an area of Manhattan that would be destroyed because of a bomb. But anyway, like I'm saying, it is amazing. We have the 50 days connection, but it is for the purpose also of hinting at the exact 229 weeks connection, like I just explained. This video was originally produced prior to December 2nd, 2023. God pointed ahead of time to December 2nd as being a very important date for prophetic signs, and a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the predicted dirty bomb or suitcase nuke explosions in New York City on February 3rd, 2024. If we want to understand God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, then it is imperative that we learn about the profound and important signs that occurred on December 2nd, 2023. These signs are explained in the absolute must-watch video titled Okinawa Obama Prophecy Video. Make sure you watch this video. The prophetic signs on December 2nd are exactly 9 weeks before the predicted date of the dirty bomb or suitcase nuke in Manhattan on February 3rd, the date 23, which hints at the number 23. And as explained in other videos, God pairs 9 and 23 together in order to confirm his signs and connections. On the same day that Obama presented his fake birth certificate, April 27, 2011, was the deadliest and costliest tornado outbreak in U.S. history, which surpassed the prophetic Super Tuesday outbreak in 2008, when Obama first took the lead in the Democrat presidential nominee primaries. Also, on April 27th, the famous street preacher from New York City died. He founded the famous Times Square Church, and he died exactly 3,000 days, which symbolizes the church, before the Manhattan blackout in Times Square, where his church is, which makes this major judgment warning for the American church. This preacher, David Wilkerson, was also known for being one of the only preachers in the days after 9/11 to preach that 9/11 was a judgment warning of impending judgment and destruction of the nation from God, instead of the typical message of peace and tolerance that was being preached in every other church at that time. Again, the number 19 is symbolic of judgment and 9/11, as 19 hints at Isaiah 9:10. April 27th, the day of the tornado outbreak, and the day of Obama's birth certificate forgery, and the day of the death of the famous New York City preacher, was exactly 19 years after New York Yankees player number 99, Aaron Judge, was adopted. Again, the number 9 and the name Judge hints at God's judgment. Player 99, Aaron Judge, was adopted by his parents named Judge the day after he was born. This is beautiful because Christ's church is God's adopted sons and daughters. Contrary to what many people that don't know God say, we are not all God's children. We can choose to be God's adopted children through his Son, Jesus Christ. And so the adoption of New York Yankees Aaron Judge, player 99, connects extremely profoundly to the date it is predicted that a dirty bomb will explode in New York City, with 19 years, and then 3,000 days, and then 45 months. The number 45 is the 9th triangular number, and from the judgment warning signs on the day of the Manhattan blackout, It is exactly 45 months to the date it is predicted that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit, but importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.